civil rights, that would fight for justice and equity, one that would pay attention to the threats of the first Trump administration and recognize that a second one would only be worse. So I think that there's a lot of frustration there. But beyond that, it is also an ideology that there are way too many people, and I know it's not everybody, but there are way too many Democrats who are willing to go along with the get along at this point. And it's a frustrating thing to watch, because it appears that the only people who are still fervently fighting are those advocates in the streets and are those civil rights stalwarts, not necessarily as many electeds as we would have expected to be in this fight. And I think that that's frustrating, quite frankly, because we know that Trump 2.0 is going to really hurt people, specifically people of color, specifically low-income groups, specifically the resonating power of America and our stance abroad as well. Those are things that we should pay very close attention to, and far too many folks are not taking up that mantle and fighting anymore. They are, quite frankly, looking at a path that is one that is going to make friends or be, play nice in the sandbox with someone who wants to destroy America and its progress.
So to that point, Molly, I mean, is there a better way to respect democratic norms and the peaceful transition of power without capitulating to Trump in advance?
Well, this is the big question, right? And we've seen a lot of elected struggle with this, right? What does it mean to, Trump? We know, I think a lot of those points are really, really important points. We know he's going to be terrible to people who have less resources. We know this plan is going to involve some pretty hair-raising stuff when it comes to deportation. I think that those are all really important points. I would say Trump is not in office yet, so there is this, sort of waiting period. But I agree with the other panelists. I think she's totally right. And I think that it definitely feels like a betrayal. Look, you can't run on the idea that the man is a danger to democracy and then be like, well, we didn't win. So, and that I think was ultimately the fallacy always, was either you believe this to be true or you don't. And it can't just be politically expedient.
So Amisha, do Democrats have it in them to take the McConnell approach and play politics the way McConnell does? McConnell came out there, said he wants Obama to be a first-term president. He stonewalled 2 Supreme Court judicial nominations, completely contradicting all of the precedents that was set for that process. Do Democrats have that kind of backbone to play politics the way Republicans do?
In short answer, I would say no. If past is principle here, at the end of the day, what we've seen from Democrats is a unwillingness to play the game that they are already in. They are playing a game that is that involves rules that Republicans no longer follow. And I think that for Democrats, you have to be in the game with the rules that they have set, but also be willing to go above and beyond. Republicans have ripped up the rule sheet. They are absolutely fine going by and eradicating all norms. And I think that Democrats have to understand that in this arena, you have to be willing to play in that same fight. Being the bigger person in the room has not helped them in every instance. And at this point, they have to do everything they can to not only resist, but I would also say to force the hand. Because one of the good things about, the last election cycle is that at least in the House, there is not an overwhelming, Republicans can't get anything through without Democrats. It just is what it is. And I think that they are going to have to use that power to showcase to the American people not only the dangerous things that Republicans are trying to implement and how those things would hurt the American public, but also to force their hand and make them make constellations that they have to. They have to ensure that their ideology does not get passed. And I think that that's one of the things that Democrats are going to have to fight really hard for and show up and show out. They've got to be on the front lines of this. They cannot capitulate. They cannot lay down. They cannot just assume that in 2 years when midterms come that they're going to have another bite at this apple and that, there's going to be a wave of Democratic leadership. They have to understand the landscape they are playing in. They also have to invest a lot more in down ballot races and pay attention to state legislatures.
Molly, as I mentioned earlier, New York Magazine has laid out 5 potential approaches to the upcoming administration, ranging from attempted cooperation to tacking to the center to cutting a few deals and hoping for Republican implosion. Where do you come down here? What is the likely scenario for Democrats?
Look, this is all sort of a nightmare scenario, right? Because Democrats don't control the Senate, they don't control the presidency, and they really don't control the House, right? Republicans have this 1-seat majority. They did have a very tough time, and they had a bigger majority in the last Congress. So there is the fact that, and a lot of these Republicans, like a lot of MAGA, is about not voting to fund the government, which is if there's going to be a piece of good news, that would be it, is that a lot of this Republican governance is about not governing. And so that does set Trump up with a collision course. And a lot of times to pass things, they had to do it. Mike Johnson, who served at the pleasure of Donald Trump, only could pass things with Democratic votes. So that is, in fact, one of the very few levers that Democrats have realistically to push. But I agree that speaking out is also super important. I think that some of what Donald Trump, what's going to be problematic for Donald Trump is that he's run on this mass deportation. That is morally really, really questionable. And I think you're going to see a lot of, almost every American has a camera, right? And they're going to be, you don't need the mainstream media to create viral moments. This is going to look really morally reprehensible. And the visuals of this mass deportation are going to be the kind of thing that, the darkest moments in American life, right? Like this act that they want to use, the Alien Insurrection Act, the Alien Enemies Act is one of the darkest moments in American life. We saw this during World War II. We saw this during World War I. So I do think that in order to do these things, you're going to really come up against public sentiment. I take no pleasure in bringing that up because I think it's going to be so horrible. But I do think that you're going to really see whether Americans are going to be able to stomach that. And I'm not convinced that they will be.
Amisha, we have about 30 seconds, but are we likely to see more resistance on a state level where Democrats have perhaps control of state legislators? Can we see them making an effort to resist Trump and his agenda in those arenas?
Absolutely. I think we already are. We've heard about the Trump proofing from governors like the governor of California, the governor of Illinois, so on and so forth. But I would argue that even in states that were considered a battleground election cycle ago, like Georgia, that kind of swung in a different way this go round, we're going to see a lot of those fights there as well. The battle for this is going to be advocates in the states. We know that Trump said that he was going to toss things to the states. People of color, specifically Black people, know what that looks like. We lived through, and our grandparents lived through Jim Crow. The battle has always been in the states. And I think that that's going to be the place to watch.
All right. Amisha Cross, Molly Jung Fast starting us off this hour. Thank you to the both of you. Greatly appreciate it. Coming up, a look back at the historic election year that was 2024. And still ahead, Bill Nye will be here live to talk all things climate. But first, Biden reportedly mulling preemptive pardons for those in Trump's crosshairs. That line White House continues after a quick break, so don't go anywhere.
Each week on my podcast, I'm joined by uniquely qualified guests who help me take a big picture look at the issues, like Representative Jasmine Crockett, late night host Seth Meyers, former Attorney General Eric Holder, and many more. Why is this happening? Listen now.
I think people still like experiences and being around other people. I think sports in general is the last destination programming on TV that people actually sit down and watch live. I may want to have, let's say, sports betting content built into my live broadcast. My son may want his fantasy team built into his live experience. And then some people like to watch sports like it's always been broadcast. So I think you're going to have choice. When women were allowed to start playing the sports and they were supporting women's sports in colleges and things of that nature, then the quality of the athletes were getting better and better. I mean, in my lifetime, I don't think I'd ever really see the day where March Madness, where the women out-delivered the men's tournament in ratings.
Each week on my podcast, I'm joined by uniquely qualified guests who help me take a big picture look at the issues, like Representative Jasmine Crockett, late night host Seth Meyers, former Attorney General Eric Holder, and many more. Why is this happening? Listen now.
President Biden is wrapping up his final days in the Oval Office with just weeks left to cement his legacy as the 46th president. One big move Biden is reportedly weighing, issuing preemptive pardons to those in Trump's path of, quote, revenge. The move would be unprecedented, an attempt to Trump-proof an effort to make the FBI and DOJ pursue his enemies. Names being discussed to receive these pardons include Dr. Anthony Fauci, former Trump official General Mark Milley, and leaders of the January 6th Select Committee, including Representatives Adam Schiff and Liz Cheney. Trump on Meet the Press threatening the committee members with jail time.
Honestly, they should go to jail.
So you think Liz Cheney should go to jail?
For what they did.
Everyone on the committee, you think?
I think everybody anybody that voted in favor.
Are you going to direct your FBI director and your attorney general to send them to jail?
No, not at all. I think that they'll have to look at that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to focus on drill, baby, drill.
Some experts argue blanket pardons are not the solution, calling them unnecessary at this point, and a message that implies guilt, as the Washington Post editorial board puts it. And potential recipients are split on the idea, some saying they would welcome the pardon, others saying they don't want one. This is a debate that continues as Biden has just over 3 weeks to make a decision. Joining me now, Jill Wine-Banks, former Watergate prosecutor, and Barbara McQuaid, former federal prosecutor as well. Together, they host the podcast Sisters-in-Law. It's great to have both of you with us. Jill, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on this preemptive pardon and what it means?
I can't help but think, Eamon, of the Gerald Ford pardon of Nixon. It was a preemptive pardon. We had not yet indicted him, despite the fact that there was plentiful evidence. We accepted that the pardon was valid, even though it was preemptive. And when it was offered to Nixon, he was told that the Burda case, a 1915 decision of the Supreme Court, meant that it would be an admission of guilt. And that made Gerald Ford feel better about offering the pardon.